There's a link on the website if you want to go back and look at anything that we've already done. Okay, so as a preface, once again, because there's a few newer people here, it's 1882. We have just gotten a copy of this book from a friend. We have not read anything that Nietzsche has written after this. We don't even know what comes later on in this book. So that's the kind of the way we're approaching this. This is new material. We're offering our own interpretations of what he's got to say without reference to Ubermensch, eternal return. When we get there, then that's going to be part of the conversation, but we're not there yet. So that's a start for the whole thing. So we're going to begin with aphorism 8. And I found this very interesting. There seems to be a kind of proposition that is being built along the way, step by step, that there's a lot about ourselves that we don't know. And a lot of it's on the surface, but a lot of it isn't. But we have it anyway. It's part of who we are, and it's possibly part of how we act. And that's what I get out of this one. I'll just have a quote, for example. We have, for example, this is right at the very end, our industry, our ambition, our acuteness, all of those words being used in this context as like our place in the world. All the world knows about that. But in addition to all that, we probably also have our industry, our ambition, our acuteness, as in our personal evaluations and exhibitions of these things. But for these reptile scales, no microscope has been invented as yet. So does anybody have any thoughts on that? I think we're sort of identifying that the individual is special for different reasons. And some of the reasons are these things that are characteristic of people generally, but are interpreted and enacted by us in particular ways. James.
Yeah, this is the unconscious, and the conscious versus the visible moral qualities. So I think it's very interesting, because we know that he was friendly with Sigmund Freud, and so we don't know. I don't know the whole history of that. I just saw it in a movie that talked about it. But the idea here is the unconscious, what we don't know, that we actually that might be visible for others or obvious for others, and we talk about them. Sometimes we take them for granted. So and they become ornaments or weapons, and so they're dangerous ones, and he's talking about, like, someday we're probably going to have this psychoanalysis, and we'll start looking at more of these things. But then he talks about the visible ones, and even the ones that might give pleasure to God with a divine microscope. So that's kind of like an interesting comment. But these are all kind of like beneath the surface, even the ones that are based on proper human values like industry, ambition, and acuteness. So, and then the last thing is the reptile scales. So the reptile scales are like, reptiles have really interesting scales because sometimes they actually look like little rocks on their skin. And the idea is that these appeared early in the evolution of the earth when there was an advantage of having skin for land animals, to have skin that looked like pebbles. So because they could blend in with the scenery better. And so I think that's the illusion that he's making here. Reptile scales. This is very beautiful. And yeah, so that's kind of unconscious virtues, and instinctive morality would value them, he says. So and then he says you are satisfied with so little, but actually it's a big deal. The unconscious mind and the unconscious virtues and the unconscious there's a kind of a very large area there. So he doesn't really say a lot, but he just talks about it here. I think I made a comment. Yeah, it's about the evolution, reference to the evolutionary adaptation of morality. Not so much as a fact, but as another metaphor. And in the present day, we use psychoanalysis for this. In other words, someone thinks they have a particular attitude towards something. Maybe there's a psychoanalytical way to get down at the cause for the actual causes for why we take these attitudes towards ourselves and others, justly or unjustly.
Yeah,
Things that are visible or not visible. Yeah, that's all.
okay. I think you're adding an awful lot that isn't there, but that's okay. I think that the metaphor with the reptile scales, I think is really pretty cool, but I don't think that he's suggesting that they're in any way a necessary evolutionary development in the sense of survival of the species. I think he's observing that this is something that doesn't appear to have any use in that sense at all. And that it's not necessarily unconscious. It's just our possession, our adaptation of these virtues, which can be collectively virtues of the human population. Jason.
I think here he talked about, well, I think Nietzsche didn't like consciousness. So our consciousness is just like scale. So if you don't use microscope, you don't see it. And it's neither ornament nor weapon. So forget about it. Don't use it. And finally, he said, unconscious virtue is possible. So I think he want to say is our virtue or moral is not conscious, which is unconscious. That's what I get.
Where does he say that? Why are you getting that out of this?
Well, built to the end, right? He said at least he considered unconscious virtue to be possible. So I think Nietzsche is talking about when we do moral, right? We consciously doing moral. Okay, just like what Kant was talking about. You doing something, you know you are doing something, not like by instinct doing something. I feel like doing something. But Nietzsche is talking just the opposite than what Kant talking about. So forget about your consciousness, okay? Unconscious virtue.
Yeah.
That's what I get, okay?
Yeah. I just read the first sentence again and realized that that is a part of what he seems to be saying here. James K. Oh, by the way, Wesley, if you're going to put it in the chat, it would be nice if you would just put your hand up and get in the queue and say it, because I'll be honest with you, I do not read the chats. So I have no idea what you're contributing. Maybe maybe everybody else does. but I would like you to just join the conversation that we're having. James K.
Yeah, I think, can I make a reference to the birth of tragedy?
Oh, yeah, sure. We've done the birth of tragedy.
Right.
Absolutely.
So I think there's a reference here to that birth of tragedy where he's talking about the Apollonian and the Dionysian. The Apollonian is the social morality of illusion, and the Dionysian is the unconscious virtues that the storehouse of the unconscious potentialities. And so he mentions here that there are those ornaments and weapons regard to others. That's a kind of a social concern there, right? And he's opposing that social concern with what is instinctively moral. He mentions instinctive morality. So that would be a reference to like the Dionysian, the unconscious. And I think that's where Freud got the idea of the unconscious from Nietzsche. And so it's there in the armaments of the reptiles, but you can't see them, right? You have to have a microscope that hasn't been. You have to have a divine microscope to peer into the unconscious, but it's there, but you just can't see it. And so he's talking about we have our ambition, our industry, our cuteness, and so forth. Those are the social moralities that conditions our our social behavior, our herd behavior. And of course, he's also talking about the opposition between the slave morality and the master morality, right? And so
Well,
for him, the
we're
master
not there.
morality.
We're not there yet. We don't
Okay,
know
all
anything.
right. Anyway, he's talking about morality. Instinctive morality refers to the unconscious virtues, and those are, and then the other social virtues are the obvious, armaments weapons, ornaments, that animals, carry around, and it's and so it is I think it is a reference to the last couple of sections that we read about industry and so forth. That's also has a concern with the social behaviors and social ambitions and so forth. And I think that's what it means by how little you are satisfied with. He's saying that you're only satisfied with this outward kind of morality of the ornaments and weapons, and so forth that are necessary for relating to others. But you're not, you should be satisfied with more, which are the unconscious virtues. There's so much more that you could be, but you're not, but you just don't realize it.
Okay, I think that the way I interpret that very last thing, at this point, the friends of instinctive morality, which I think is what he's describing. Now, thank you for bringing that up. I had to look that for a second. Anyway, we'll say, bravo, at least he considers unconscious virtues possible, and that suffices us. And I think this goes back to aphorism 2 about the intellectual conscience, because you always have to have the desire for certainty, so you can't just stop there. You're just scratching the surface again, possibly, because he does say probably.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that he's really kind of amplifying that theme a little bit more, that's where you're going to stop. There's way more to do than that, way more to learn,
right.
Way more in our search for certainty.
Would you agree that it is a reference to the Apollonian and the Dionysian?
I'd have to think more about that. I think you simplified the Dionysian a little too much, but I don't have any trouble accepting a reference to that. Fred.
Yeah, it's apparently, I guess it's my role to be a gadfly here and pique your ire, Lindsay, but it's all in fun. first of all, as usual, Nietzsche screws up the biology. He doesn't. He's wrong on that. With the reptiles, it's not a very good analogy, because the primary role of reptile scales is motility. For example, a desert sidewinder has peculiar patterns, what Nietzsche calls, what does he call them? Sculptures. Well, it has peculiar surface pattern that increases its adhesion to granular surfaces, so that the sidewinder can go up a sandy slope better than other snakes. So even though it's not visible, it definitely has a survival function. And once again, it's not survival of species, but of the individual, and we'll let that go. So I think in general, what I find is that anytime he makes an argument with recourse to biology, he's probably wrong. But I think you can just ignore the biology part of his arguments and take it for what it is without that. Secondly, I don't quite get the reference here, the distinction that he makes between our diligence, et cetera, and our emphasized ambition, diligence, et cetera, because I take it that it's a difference between personal and collective. But oddly, in the German, the first one is unsere, and the second one is unseren. So the second one is the plural. So the hidden one is the our industry in italics refers, as far as I can tell, to our collective industry, ambition, acuteness. I would think it'd be the other way around, but maybe I just got that wrong. I'm just a little confused about how we are to take the two, our diligence versus our diligence, et cetera. Any clarification would be appreciated. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so he was wrong about the biology. Yeah, the metaphor serves a useful purpose. You can't see it without a microscope. So it's hidden. It's there, but it's hidden. And I think that suffices for me. And I'm still, that paragraph I read at the very beginning, the italicized hour, and I hate to go back, I rather prefer just using the translations that we have and not go back to whatever the original German was, because a choice did have to be made, and different translators can change it. And I don't know if the essence of what he's saying, what I think he's saying, has changed in any way. Because I think what he's saying is that the first references we have, for example, our industry, our ambition, our acuteness, that is the collective sense that, oh, he's got a real sense of humor. And yeah, okay, he's got a sense of humor, but he's also got his sense of humor. And I think that is what he intends here. That's how I'm taking it. That the hour in italics individualizes those virtues. We have our own way of acting in these fashions that even we are not sure why we do what we do in a lot of cases. And I don't know if that's your experience, but that is certainly my experience.
Yeah, I agree. That's how I would take it too, but that's not what the German is.
Well, I don't care what the German is, I'll be honest with you.
Okay.
Yeah, I've got English and the German, you know, we could spend hours just arguing over different German words and their interpretations. German is a much more flexible language than English, and you can do a lot more with it. And I don't want to go there. So,
Well, all right, fine.
all right, James. Cook.
Right. Yeah. I was just gonna. I just a couple of critical comments, since no one is embarrassed by critical comments here, I suppose. I don't agree with singling out a single species and making a rule for a genus. You know, like the whole reptile family based on the motility of a single species. That's not it's not only is it bad biology, but it's not logical.
No.
That's the reason I'm saying that. And the other thing is on Dionysius. Maybe one person isn't kind of like offended by every time the word Nietzsche comes up, we talk about Dionysius, but other people may be kind of like a little bit affected by that generality of trying to make that point. Thank you.
Okay, Audrey.
Well, I was going to also question the 2 hours, our industry and stuff. I thought one was the more social, the social realm, and then basically what you said, Lindsay, was the second one is our personal, so how we use it, what's personal to us, I guess. So it's more individual. That's the way I took it. I don't know if it's an important part of this or not, but it seems like, there is a social way of behaving that we try to follow, but we might not really personally agree with it or something. And so we have our ways. And then also what you're saying is about, you do things and you don't even know why. So that part is interesting. I don't know if he goes there, but I think that's an interesting way to look at it too. Thank you. That's all.
Well, thank you. Yeah, well, okay. You agree with me, that's the most part. Anyway, James K.
Yeah, I just wanted to, if I forgot to mention that he's talking about two kinds of moralities. One is visible, one is invisible. And that's why and that correlates with the idea of the unconscious. Right? One is unconscious, the other one is conscious. And I think that's where the Dionysian, reference is the invisible. And I'd say, with the tragedy, that's, to me, that's what the whole point of that book is about, is that the tragic hero is all puffed up with the visible qualities, visible moral qualities of courage, heroism, and so forth. And in other words, he's invested in his ego, and the whole idea of the purpose of tragedy, according to Nietzsche, is a collapse of that social ego, and is allows for the triumph of the chorus and the representative of the unconscious, which is for him is the Dionysian. That's how I understand what Dionysus mean, as opposed to the Apollonian. And so here he's talking about our industry, our ambition, our acuteness. I think is a reference to the collective social ego, social concern, social morality, as opposed to the instinctive moralities, which are the invisible unconscious. And these are the virtues, unconscious virtues, that are possible. And my reading is that he's saying that the ones who are only concerned with our industry, our ambition, our acuteness, are so so satisfied with so little because they're not aware of what's invisible, the instinctive morality that's invisible to them. So that's how
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, the thing about instinct here, I think, is important to pay attention to. And I think that really what's being focused here, and I'll say this again, is each of us has something different from everybody else. It's our adaptation of or expression of these instinctive drives. We own them, they belong to us, even though we can't see them. I think that is where he's going, or what he's suggesting. That's not I think a little bit of what I've been saying all along is the core of the whole thing. Josh.
Yeah, I mean, to follow up on where you're going with this, Lindsay, and where James K was going with this, I think that that Nietzsche is wanting to prepare us for his critique of morality here and the instinctive versus the the hour.
Josh, it's 1882. We don't know anything about that critique because we're not there yet. So please don't make references to what he is going to do later. We are just dealing with this and
I'm
that.
wondering if you've read enough to. I wasn't here the last 3 sessions, so I don't know what you've already gone over. So I'm going to guess.
We are as far as this aphorism. That's as far as we are. We don't know.
Haven't you, Lindsay? Hasn't this discussion going on for the last 3 weeks already? This isn't your first session on the gay sciences, so that's what I'm saying. Is that I've missed a lot, and so I was assuming that what I missed in that some of that background already involved a bit of his leading us into a critique of morality. I mean, that's what this book is about from beginning to end. So I'm not. Okay, I don't know what you know because I wasn't here. So let me just. All right. So just speaking of this aphorism in itself, if it's possible to do that, while ignoring all the background that each of us has or doesn't have, that is going to be unconsciously inserted into our interpretation, whether we want to or not. There is a focus here on. He's playing with us with his teasing reference to there's unconscious virtues, and so he wants to tease us because he's wanting to he's hinting here that he has more in mind than simply making it an equal distinction between what we have already accept in the 1800s as the virtues, as social virtues, and perhaps what many of us in the 1800s, having been imbued with Romanticism, understand in terms of unconscious virtues, thanks to Schopenhauer and Schelling and Kant and people like that have already opened up this avenue towards the unconscious. But they've opened up the avenue towards the unconscious and the notion of unconscious virtues in a particular way. So I'm just suggesting that Nietzsche is hinting at here that he has something different up his sleeve by taunting us a little bit or teasing us with this. Oh, okay. We think we know where you're going, Nietzsche. And Nietzsche's saying, no, not so fast. Okay, so I guess that's all I can say. Okay, I won't say he's already telling us that he wants to launch a bold critique against morality because that's he hasn't said that yet, but he is telling us to hold our horses if we're just going to go along with the assumptions that we've inherited from Romanticism.
Yeah, the conceit of this meetup is that we don't know what's coming. We're going to watch him develop these thoughts and proceed along some sort of path. Maybe not. A lot of us know. A lot of us are familiar. So you're right. We are bringing a lot of that in. But the idea is let's just play with these ourselves and watch and see what he's doing here. And then we might be surprised when we get to some of the stuff down the road. Okay, James.
Yeah. Listening to people has given me a lot of impetus. There's a lot of this idea of like things that can't be discovered, but there's also the things that we take for granted that other people know what we're up to, even though we might hide our morality, even when we have good morality, or we have fairly solid morality, and we sort of keep it under covers because we don't want to be known as moralists or something like that. So they're and the key words here, I think, are the divine microscope and the artificially sharpened eye that similar species could have, that might have special insights. So that's all. I just sort of there's a lot of clues here to what he's talking about. but it's not direct. It's not direct at all, and that's why the conversation has been very wide. But he's talking about morality, and that's exciting.
Yeah, he is. He's explicitly talking our visible moral qualities, that there isn't any sense of,
Right.
of
Or is he talking about the he's talking about
negative. I'm sorry, James, said you didn't had to see your hand up. Were you going to
Okay,
say
fine.
something?
Yeah, is he talking about a conflict between two moralities then?
Yeah, well, the only conflict, or the only thing that I would imagine he's not, I don't think he's observing a conflict. I think he's observing and commenting on what he thinks is the real deal. We have an instinctive morality and we have a visible morality. And the instinctive morality is at some level unconscious. You
And,
don't
he's critiquing the idea of those who have a certain morality that they seem to settle for, and that they should, you know, have more of an expectation that of these virtuous, you know, something more with these virtues from the unconscious that are not visible. People are too, you know, he's saying that people are too settled with what is visible.
I don't think he's saying that. I think he's saying there's more than what's visible.
Exactly.
That's
Yeah,
all.
yeah, I agree on that. There's more, but that
I
people,
think
the last sentence is says how little you are satisfied with, right? I think that's a critique of people who are, you know, adhere to these ambitions, industry, and what is visible. And I think that's a critique of those kind of people.
well, it may be, it's not very, I don't think it's a very good critique. I think it's more of a critique of people who are satisfied with a certain amount of knowledge when a lot more knowledge is available. Or at least
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
available.
I'm
Yeah.
wondering if everyone agrees that we can have levels of visibility. In other words, you could sort of
Well,
like
yeah,
see some
that-
things and not see others, but then somebody else could see certain other
Yeah.
things. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure we'll all agree with that.
Well, of course, and Nietzsche's claiming that he is, you know, he is able to understand and see the invisible, as opposed to those who cannot. And he's critiquing those people who are too settled with what is visible and not take the time or energy to devote to invest in what is invisible.
I don't think
Okay, well,
Nietzsche's not saying he has the divine glasses. Yeah.
Hands up, guys, hands up from here on out, okay? We're not going to do it back and forth. He says in that paragraph I quoted earlier, but in addition to all that, we probably also have. He's not assertive. And I think this is something that needs to be looked at from time to time, whether he's asserting or suggesting or observing and putting it out there to be thought about. He's not saying there is, but he's saying there probably is. Audrey.
Who said artificial eye or something? Was that you, James Cook?
Artificially sharpened eye.
Yeah,
That's
where
similar
did it
animals.
officially come from? I just realized that. I don't understand that.
Microscope.
Levels of visibility.
James, a microscope enhances vision, a telescope enhances vision, enables you to see things you can't see with your own eye. It's an artificial addition, a manufactured addition to a normal sense. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, yeah, I get the telescope and but we also sometimes have sharpened eyes. I mean, that's part of the different levels, and I don't see that as artificial. That's all. I just was questioning the word.
Okay.
And I'm getting confused what we're allowed to question. So
you can offer an alternative to what somebody else says, or or something like that. I'm not really sure either. This is sort of a new thing where we're kind of two people are going after each other, and you're not really doing that. But there's when something arises, and we'll just work them up. Jason, I think, is going to save the day and tell me how to do this, Jason.
Yeah, okay. So since you talk about the italic hour as individual, so that bring me to a different thinking about the scale of reptile. So in the scale of reptile, you collectively you know they have a scale, but individually you don't see it. So he is talking about the other than I interpret as talk about morality, virtue. He seems another way to interpret is he seems to talk about collective versus individual. So
Yeah.
that's another thing I see.
Yeah, I think that's the essence. Sometimes, and I could be wrong, but I get a feeling that you're looking for a lot more than is there. I think a lot of this is pretty straightforward and not as complicated as some people tend to make it. And some of these later on will be very complicated, and I know we're not there yet, but in this case so far where we've gone in here, sometimes it seems like people just really run away with all kinds of stuff that just isn't there. So moving on to 9, which is a variation of 8, our eruptions. And this is another reference to sort of instinctive behavior. And again, he's got a really, really lovely metaphor here. All of us harbor concealed gardens and plantings. And to use another metaphor, we are, all of us, growing volcanoes that approach the hour of their eruption. But how near or distant that is, nobody knows, not even God. Well, I think this is sort of an addendum to what came before, that there are things inside of us that grow, not just our ability to learn, but our adaptation to life, circumstances, other people, ideas. But, well, okay, so he's also saying that, well, does anybody have any thoughts on this one? Yeah, James.
Each of us is growing volcanoes in our garden, and they may erupt.
No.
No, I'm
No.
gonna do it. I'm sorry. I got to do. This is what presidential candidates talk this way. I can do it too. So each of us is growing volcanoes in our garden, and they may erupt in front of us, or they may erupt generations from now. There's no way of absolutely knowing when that's going to occur, but yet we keep doing it. Go ahead and argue. Yeah.
Well, he doesn't say we're growing volcanoes, number one. He says, one way of looking at it is all of us harbor concealed gardens and plantings. And what that means, looking at the rest of it, is that we have like he didn't know about, well, I don't know what he knew about genes, but the suggestion is that we have a heritage built into our lineage from previous generations. And those are the plantings. We are the garden. The next line says, to use another metaphor, we are growing volcanoes. That's volcanoes don't grow in gardens, they grow from mountains, right? So it's a whole other way of approaching it. Some of us are full of that kind of eruptive energy, and maybe we'll express it and maybe we won't, and no one knows if we will or if we won't. So, James.
I was just going to say, I follow my own road, I plant my volcanoes in my garden. Okay. So
Okay.
what you do is up to you, Lindsay.
Yeah. All right. James K.
Yeah, this is a follow-up to the last one where the unconscious virtues, right? And that's a reference to those gardens and so forth, the potentiality of talent and so forth that could be dormant, and but you just wait another generation and they manifest themselves, in geniuses, in artistic creativity and so forth. But then the unconscious also is unpredictable. It could be like a volcano that erupts with all these chaos, So the unconscious is like an indeterministic, cauldron of potentiality for genius, talent, and also for chaos. It could be destructive as well as creative. So I think it's a follow-up to the last one.
Yeah,
And it's
okay.
a reference to like the Dionysian. That's what the Dionysian is like. It's an undetermined, source of potentiality, possibilities.
Well, okay. I think you've got the Dionysian completely wrong. The Dionysian is the world as it really exists without Apollonian image building imposed on top of it. The Dionysian spirit is better for you never to have been born. And if you have been born, better to die soon. That's the spirit of Dionysian. It's not unconsciousness or any of that stuff. That's where Dionysian may exist, but it's the real world, as opposed to the Apollonian world where the veil of Maya is covering over all the ugliness underneath.
Right.
Just-
When you say the real world, that's exactly, I think, what the Dionysian is, and what he's describing is that there is this potentiality for good, for virtue, and also potentiality for chaos and destruction. It is the real world of pleasure and suffering. That's the real world of life.
James.
Okay, so I see this one as talking about Hegel's the change in quantity will lead to change to the quality. So just take the previous one, individual and collective. So a lot of small thing and simming up like volcano. We don't know when it will become a social collective change. That's what I read, so.
Yeah, I'll go there. Josh.
Yeah, I think bringing up Hegel is a good idea. When I look at this passage, I ask myself, if I'm reading this in 1882, am I going to be getting anything from this passage that doesn't already seem familiar to me from Hegel and from other idealists who have already prepared me for thinking of history in terms of change and evolution? And I would say no, I mean, I wouldn't be excited yet by what I read. I would say it's a flowery and somewhat beautiful and poetic rendering of what's already familiar to me. So I wouldn't be that interested in reading ahead yet on the basis of this section. If I were looking for looking for that radical break with what went before. But it would keep me interested. I would say, all right, now let's see what else he's got to offer here, based on maybe the previous sections, but not this one. That's just my opinion.
Okay, all right. So the thought itself, does it mean anything to you, or it validates something, or because it does seem more like a literary criticism than an approach to the itself.
It validates a way of thinking that was still relatively fresh. Well, I mean, been around for 100 years now in Europe, and that is to look at history in a dynamic way in terms of transformation and in terms of the eruptive power of the will. I mean, you see that in Schelling, certainly, and that's what it makes me think of. And that's what I would think it would make others think of at that time. Those that were, that were familiar with the philosophy of that time.
Okay. So, okay, okay, Jason.
Yeah, I also think about the last sentence also interesting, right? He talked about, at least I'm thinking he talking about this, about the personal growing. You change, right? Before you are this kind of person, then after 3 years, then you become this kind of person. Introvert become extrovert. Okay, that's possible, but it's gradually built up. And sometimes Jason become a different person, but nobody knows. Even myself don't know. Even God doesn't know. So another way to look at it.
But the seeds of who you might be are planted in maybe the culture he's talking about. I mean, he doesn't say culture, so I'm hesitant to go there. But he seems to be speaking of family lineage of one way or another, or even of past ages. The seeds are already there, and you're going to develop them or not develop them. Audrey, your hand was up, and now it's not. Now it's up again. Now it's down again. Audrey, do you have something you want to say? You're muted.
Oh, you're
Audrey.
muted, Audrey.
You're muted, Audrey. Please let me manage.
Very sorry. I just wanted to say that to me, I read this and I felt it was just another way of talking about history and which I found an interesting way to talk about history. Nothing here is factual. It's just, I mean, getting back to what Josh was saying, each of these, it makes me want to read a little bit more, just because I'd say, oh, this is a different approach. If I had to start fresh, I mean, you want us to start fresh, like this is the first time I've ever heard anything. So I can't be like that. I'm 70 years old and I have a lot behind me. So, but that's what I just sort of, it was another way to think about history, but
Okay.
special in this particular one. That's all.
Yeah, no, that's fine. That's fine. I'm not asking you. See, Josh made reference to predecessors and German idealism and all that. This was the world Nietzsche lived in. I'm not sure the rest of us are familiar with all of those people, so I don't know that we can share in the thoughts that are being expressed, but the ideas are still there. So I'm just asking you not to suddenly bring in things we're not at yet. That's all. Heck, I'm going to be 79 on Saturday, and
Congratulations.
if I can do it, you can do it, Audrey. Okay, James K.
Yeah, I just wanted to tell you happy birthday.
Thanks.
And 79, huh? You look you don't look over 50.
I agree completely. All right.
Yeah, I want to sort of point out how this one relates to the last one about the unconscious virtues, right? And so definitely the unconscious virtues, the invisible, right? He's talking about the hidden gardens and plantations, so forth. Or all of us harbor in ourselves hidden gardens and plantations. Those are like the unconscious virtues. And those are invisible, and then the visible, is the manifestations of these hidden potentialities, the virtues. But the difference is that what is invisible can also be very catastrophic. It breaks out into a volcanic eruption. And so it's unpredictable, what life is, and we're ruled by both the unconscious as well as the we think that we're agents of in the world of the conscious.
Yeah. James Cook.
I wanted to call attention to the genealogical aspect of grandchildren, children and grandchildren, and grandfathers, and God, the son betraying the father, and all that stuff. I mean, the genealogical comes. Only some people maybe made a reference to that. I didn't, and I want to thank the people that interpreted this subjectively, because that's another thing that I missed, is that you can see this in a subjective light, and I'm like way too past Heidegger for thinking that way, and that's valuable to understand that this is can be interpreted as not just a genealogical but also a subjective statement. Thank you.
Is there any
Yeah,
other
I don't know
interpretation?
how, James K., hold on. We're not going to do back and forth. If you want to reply, put your hand up. We're not going to do that. Just watch Succession on HBO, okay? Or just read the news about what's happening with with Murdoch and his sons now. The kids are not like him. And that's kind of all that Nietzsche is observing here, is that they're not reproductions of one another, and nobody knows quite exactly what may be hidden in the next generation. And so when the next generation does something, there's a little piece of the preceding generation in there somewhere that was hidden. It was the garden or the planting or whatever in you. I think that sounds even more complicated than I want it to be. Audrey.
I was talking about 10. I wasn't talking about 9. It's so funny, because I totally see that in more subjective in 9 for sure.
Okay.
I found that quite interesting. It's 10 that just seems to be more about history. I'm sorry, I'm sort of looking ahead. Remember what I read. Okay, never mind. Thanks.
Yeah, all right. So what we have here is the next aphorism, 10. We'll move on to 10 now. 8, 9, and 10 are related in ways that a lot of the other previous aphorisms haven't been. So there seems to be a restatement of this notion of things that can't be seen, that are inside of us, of the relation between generations. And in 10, here he's sort of describing culture and the way some of these eruptions, I think, that he sort of has hinted at in 9, can occur, or even the plantings in a way, that in a societies where the culture changes rapidly. And I think like modern culture could be a comparison for that, or an expression of that. We do not live in a settled age and haven't for, 100 years or 200 years. Or the culture, it's hard to even identify an American culture, number one. But if you have a culture like the English culture in the 1850s, they produced some of the greatest novelists in the world. And they have been like that more or less since the time of Elizabeth. And I think that would be a culture that would be representative of a conservative culture, something that preserves and keeps a certain standard of values alive and enduring. And that is when somebody can break that mold and approach greatness. So that's where I'm at with that one. Anybody offer anything? James Cook.
I always like being the first. Thank you. In this meeting, I am usually the first, which is interesting. I don't think that's always the case. I like this. I like this one because it made me think very subjectively, and it talks about the atavisms of people and its mores, and how the way one can really understand a little about them. And the idea of comparing cultures and so forth. And he talks about the German, I think his society as being an andante culture because it's passionate and slow spirited, and uh, and that the value of conservative generations is felt and talked about. So, so that's the andante culture, I would call it, the one that sort of like just moves along slowly of the 19th century Germany. And then today, of course, everything is different. Everything is this is a hip hop culture. This is a and so yeah, he points out something very important today, that we can sort of like see ourselves according to our culture. And uh, I I think he mentions this. He mentions, I think, eccentric here, right? Eccentricity. Um, uh, yeah, the individual, right, has to. Whoever feels these powers in himself, the extraordinary powers, must nurse, defend, honor, and cultivate them against another world that resists them. And that person, until he becomes either a great human being or a mad and eccentric one, or he perishes early, he's going to run into problems. But the point is that as eccentric, we sometimes have advantages over people who aren't eccentric, or a person who is mad could have advantages. But the idea is that the person who is talented needs to cultivate the talent, and sometimes even being eccentric could actually be an advantage, especially socially, because if you're odd, and if you're considered odd because you're talented, then perhaps being eccentric would be a way to get through that kind of pressure, that downward pressure on people who are talented. And that's why we sometimes do see the geniuses be a little eccentric and have an advantage that way. They're pushed to the side, but they are also recognized as geniuses. I'm thinking of Einstein, of course, but there's many others that in show business, et cetera, that
Well,
succeed the same way.
okay, yeah. I don't think that he's really commenting too much on the virtues of eccentricity. I think he's trying to observe what the first sentence says. I prefer to understand the rare human beings of an age as suddenly emerging late ghosts of past cultures and their powers, as atavisms of the people and its mores, which are its customs and its sets of morality. And yeah, I don't know quite where to go with that either. Josh.
Yeah, I was unmute there. Yeah, I mean that first sentence to me stands in an interesting tension with the his characterization of this the rare human being. Now, so this to me is somebody, imagining myself as somebody who is used to, a different kind of a philosophy, or as I said before, a kind of a romantic notion of history. This to me, I would perk up my ears and I begin to sense literally some strange notions here. They're subtle, right? For example, the description of the strangeness, the rarity, the extraordinariness of it, and then the reference to the madness and the eccentricity. Again, I'm not suggesting that he's pinpointing eccentricity so much as that it's important to him to throw in that notion of madness. Now, I could say, well, okay, as a romantic, I'm familiar with this. There was this attraction to the eccentric and the mad. But Nietzsche is in this paragraph is well, okay. So let me ask you this: how would you square the notion of somebody that suddenly appearing as a late ghost of a past culture versus the latter part of the paragraph in which he describes the where he says such atavism is highly improbable, where races, habits, and valuations change too rapidly. So he says, so it's only when races, habits, and valuations change too rapidly that you get the danger of madness and loneliness. And so it seems to me that there's that tension there, that I want to say that he's throwing out that this dichotomy between the kind of the slow, conservatively changing culture versus this rapidly changing culture. So I don't know, I almost want to say that it's possible to, at the same time, I mean, based on what I'm reading in this paragraph, it's possible at the same time to be an individual that references in their becoming, or in their and they're emerging as this rare human, as a rare human being, a reference to this ghosts of past cultures, at the same time that one is moving into this strange, I don't know, I don't know if you're seeing it that way or not.
Yeah, I'm seeing this. I just have a simpler take on a lot of these things. He's recognizing that a rare human being can only be recognized. A rare human being is like a throwback in a way, and it may go back millennia to be that rare human being who is bringing an old way of being in the world. And this will not happen in a rapidly changing culture. The rare human being won't appear. The rare human being won't be distinguished from everybody else. And he's not talking here again. There goes back to that, the noble person versus the common person. And and I think I am interpolating here. The rare person, I think, is the noble person. And I think that Nietzsche thinks he is the rare person. But I'm just sort of throwing that in there. In a culture where things rapidly change, you won't be able to recognize them as noble or rare people, because everybody that pops up is suddenly rare, because the culture is changing so rapidly that there's no way of recognizing somebody who is a noble person in the sense that Nietzsche has developed in a prior aphorism. And I'm not sure that he's condemning that. Again, I think that this is sort of an observation of how a rare person is recognized. Jason.
Yeah, I think I agree with you, because I kind of confused on the sentence. He talked about what is absolutely necessary is an identity of development, right? As the temple of passionate and slow spirit. So he seems to, just like what Lindsay you talk about, want us to, he really asked, in this text, he really asked me like, thou shalt do this. But this one sounds like you should slow down. And based on your interpretation, the real person or real human beings or genius will bring back as atavism, right? So that's thing. But at the beginning, I raised my hand because I feel this one first is musical, because he used the words andante, used tempo, and based on what Audrey talked about is related to history, and you also talk about related to culture. So I kind of think about it's kind of related to Hegel. Hegel famously talked about the spirit. Okay, it's like progressively developed. So Nietzsche doesn't say I agree or I disagree. He kind of talked about it's not that simple. Okay, it may reoccur and then throw up something. It's absolutely necessary. It's an identity of development. Slow it down, don't rush. Probably that's what you want to say.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. I really appreciate that. Nietzsche himself was a musician, an accomplished musician of that. And Wagner was one of his best friends at one time, a father figure of sorts. By this time, he wrote this book, though they had parted ways. But he was nonetheless familiar with all of that. But I think an exemplar for just about everybody that was a German at the time was Goethe. Goethe could never have been recognized as the giant of a human being that he was, if it weren't for the slow tempo of the culture of Germany at that time. And he stood out in a way that nobody else stood out. And he became an example. That's why he references Goethe as much as he does. And he's hardly the only one that does. And I think that was where his admiration, this is what we got out of Schopenhauer as educator. I think he saw Schopenhauer the same way, because Schopenhauer became a philosopher, which is an anthropocene, right, going back to Socrates or whatever, in a world that only had respect for academic philosophers. And here he stepped out of that mold. James.
Yeah, those are all really good ideas and concepts. I think when he talks about the atavisms being improbable, if we increase the tempo, if things become too rapid, I would take that with a grain of salt, because he doesn't know. I think we're currently, like I said before, we're currently in this hip hop culture, and we have tons of eccentricity and madness and atavisms and all kinds of variety in this culture. So we're not going to. I really feel offended about the pushback against madness and eccentricity. I think that's exactly in line with what he's talking about. He's talking about the rare human beings of an age suddenly emerging, late ghosts of past cultures and their powers, and those mores of those people, like are projected forward into the future. And that's a really good point, and that's even a good point, I think, for James K's attitude of, like, let's talk about the Dionysian and the Apollonian, if we in the current day. Yeah, sure, that's a form of madness and eccentricity that we could actually abide. So I just want to push back against the pushback. In other words, if he's making points, let's preserve the points. The points is that all of these atavisms occur, and he's wrong. I think that they would diminish in the hip hop culture. No, they're absolutely alive today, and they provide a lot of color to the landscape. And let's observe those, because that's really what Nietzsche is talking about here. The fact that all of the old morality is related to the new morality. The conservatism is related to the liberalism. That all of that is happening and folding and unfolding itself in time. And if that reminds people of Hegel, that's because of Hegel's greatness. It doesn't really have anything to do with the text here, but yeah, that keeps coming up. But yeah, it's because of Hegel, not because of Nietzsche. Yeah.
All right, Hegel was the predecessor, but I resist the idea that he is celebrating eccentricity for its own sake, or madness, because he says in the second sentence, now they seem strange, rare, extraordinary, and whoever feels these powers in himself must nurse, defend, honor, and cultivate them against another world that resists them, until he becomes either a great human being or a mad and eccentric one. I don't think he's celebrating eccentricity for its own sake.
Let's take a vote. I think he's perfectly in favor of it. These are great human beings. Eccentricity is a personality tactic.
James. This is not an issue to vote on. It's an issue of interpretation of that sentence. I
vote for the great people. I'm sorry, Lindsay, we have a disagreement here.
No, we don't have a disagreement, because that's not what this is about. This is about how a rare, great genius cannot be recognized in a rapidly changing society. That's what he's saying here. That a culture needs to move andante at a slow, measured pace. And then the genius can appear. James K.
Yeah, I agree with you. And that's and there's a reference to the section 5 and 6, right? Where six and 7, I should say, where he talks about the loss of dignity, right?
Yeah.
And that and he's referring to this kind of person in this section as this kind of person who is in a culture where they no longer appreciate philosophical thinking, artistic music and culture and so forth, and they're just caught up with what is industrious, which is the next section after 6, something for the industrious, right? And that is the culture that's moving so fast, changing so fast that it doesn't even recognize, what kind of person is there, because he's like something from out of the past, and it's and I think he was referring to that as a kind of a conservatism that is that is not appreciated enough.
Yeah. Josh, you're going to get the last word because I have an appointment. And there's no way we're going to move on to consciousness with 15 minutes. Forget it. Yeah, I'm definitely saving that one out. James Cook, I'm not going to call on you because I've got a thing to do right after. And so these sessions will be identified as 1 hour, but I will always be willing to go over that hour. But I can't schedule it all the way to 4:30 because there's something I'm doing at 5, but I need to be at another place. Josh.
Okay, yeah, it's helpful for me to link back that the kind of additive paragraph with the previous paragraph or eruptions, especially where he talks about how it is already the son. It's the son that betrays the father, but then the father understands himself better once he has a son. And prior to that, he talks about how some age seems to lack completely some talent or virtue, just as some people do, but just wait for their children and grandchildren. If you have time to wait, they bring to light the inner qualities of their grandfathers, the qualities that their grandfathers themselves did not know about. So here you have, within sort of the lineage of generations, you have the parallel to his description of this of the lone, the rarity that emerges, but yet is in a sense channeling. I mean, if you pardon the expression, perhaps something within the grandfather, and something that the father, let's say, the grandfather didn't notice it in himself. The father is maybe taken completely unawares, but then it says it allows the father to understand himself better. So here you have a way of understanding how this rarity, in a sense, isn't so rare, right? I mean, which is what Nietzsche is saying. It's not rare as soon as there's recognition, and there can be recognition precisely. There could be recognition on the part of previous generations within the family, precisely because it taps into something which is there in some level, say it unconsciously, that may not be recognized. Okay, that's all I have to say.
Okay. Well, okay then. I'm going to leave it there too. So thank you for hanging in there. I know we lost a few people along the way, but yeah, they hung in there for the most part. So we're going to deal with consciousness next week. Oh my God. All right. So I'm going to be posting next week's meetup. I'm not going to do it until probably tomorrow. It'll go up tomorrow, sometime late morning, early afternoon. And even though it says an hour, we will go over if need be. So read aphorism 10 to 20. I'll put that. But we're going to start.
No, it's not possible to go to 20. I don't think we never go over 3 sections. So.
Yeah, there's no way
Yeah.
I'm ready for next week. That's
That's right.
I know. I'm prepared mentally for maybe we just might blow through these. I really enjoy what we're doing here, and I hope you guys do too.
Right, right.
I'm having we're exploring a lot of ideas here, a lot of which are completely wrong. Anyway,
We have to be open to Nietzsche's ideas being wrong too, right, Lindsay?
oh, absolutely. No,
Yeah, I
I
think-
agree with what he said. All I'm trying to do is give my interpretation of what he's saying. I'm not so sure I agree with the one we just went
And do you
over.
agree that everyone else is trying to do the same thing?
There's no,
Oh, well, yeah, we're all trying to do that, but I think there are sentences that are so explicit that they're not subject to a lot of wild interpretation. That's where I'm coming from in a lot of
right, right.
ways.
You can't be too subjective.
Yeah, some people can run off and just go into this whole other space that's just not even there. But
Yeah.
that's for
Yeah.
another day,
Right.
hopefully. All right.
Don't be so Nietzschean.
Okay. See you guys.